All right, we are live. Sorry, everyone who's been waiting. We had a bit of a technical problem and I had to kind of restart everything. But welcome to our session today. Let me get myself set here. Perfect. Okay, so yeah. So welcome everyone to our third online talk of the PdBA. Today we'll be talking to architect Jānis Aufmanis on architecture and digital twins and how our guest sought to rebuild the Palácio Iglésias and his experience in Lisbon. We'll talk a little more about this in a bit. We are streaming from both Lisbon and Riga, if I'm not mistaken, and from two PdBA channels. So if you're watching us, if you aren't already from either Twitch or YouTube, there are these two options. But YouTube is our regular channel where you can also find the recording of the session later on. And where we also have hosted the previous sessions, previous talks and which I invite you also to watch later. One is from with artist Gaspar Cohen on the PdBA's first online exhibition commission artwork, and the other was just recently done as well with Henry Cepeda on performance spaces for virtual worlds. We also have a couple of talks and events coming up, so do follow us here, there, and everywhere for more updates. I am Lia Carreira. I'm a creator and manager of the Palácio das Belas Artes Lisboa, PdBA for short, as we like to say it, which is an independent artistic and curatorial project that through our online platform hosts exhibitions, public talks, workshops, and residencies both in Lisbon and internationally as well. We invite artists, curators, and a whole set of different creatives and researchers to reimagine other possible relationships between the physical and the digital space. We focus on a particular palace, a particular building in Lisbon, which is the Iglesias Palace, and which we're going to talk a bit about today. For this year, we also have chosen to expand the discussion to include the topic of digital spatialities, which is kind of like the backbone of today's talk as well. And for us, digital spatiality is more of an investigative investigation tool rather than a well-defined concept. As we're researching together with our guests and partners, what are the digital spaces of today's art institutions and artistic practices? We are also asking what are the tools that bridge their relationship with current art production and exhibition making. And so digital twins is therefore a key concept in this discussion, therefore the title of this of today's talk, because the PdBA also sets to replicate through these very different forms and modalities of digital spaces, the Iglesias Palace. And digital twins have become some sort of buzzword in recent years, like AI was for a couple of years ago and still is kind of, and particularly within the tech business and industry sector. And it can be simply explained as a form of digital replica of a physical asset. Which can be kind of like a space, but it can also be any sort of object that you want to digitally reproduce. And it has been receiving this growing attention because it's being used for as a form of a spatial interface for real-time monitoring, analysis, or optimizations of those kind of businesses and industries for a number of other purposes. But it usually involves some sort of immersion, simulation, sometimes automation, but it can also be seen through just 3D models as a form of representation or design visualization of a certain space or object. So this is very broad and it's being used in different forms in different fields. We kind of can sum it up more or less like this, and this is what we've been trying to do with the PdBA, with the Palácio Iglésias, which is through these collaborations, inviting artists and researchers to kind of, through different digital tools and different mediums as well, we have been using sound as well to create a spatial kind of a spatial setting of the Palácio to kind of replicate this historical building. And we do that because we want to not only revive this forgotten legacy and the relevance of this architectural heritage from Lisbon, but also because it is now being underused amid the city's current housing crisis. But we get to that discussion in a bit as well, I hope. And that said, I just wanted to then welcome our guests. So Jānis Aufmanis is an architect from Riga, investigating pragmatic and sustainable approaches to historical urban sites. He's a co-founder of the Community for Riga Center Development NGO that aims to improve public space and life in Riga city center. And he has been actively involved in a series of projects that seeks to democratize decision-making in the city. He has a bachelor in architecture from the Riseba University, I hope I said that right, and a very, very recent master graduate, congratulations, from the KU, or how do you say it, KU Leuven, right, so in Brussels. So Jānis was our first guest from the PdBA to visit Lisbon in April, where he conducted a creative research on the Palácio Iglésias. And so we invited him to talk a bit about his experience here and about his views and practice with digital twins, digital replicas, replicating this cultural heritage through digital means. Within the field also related to architecture. And Jānis's visit was possible thanks to the Culture Moves Europe Mobility Program, which is funded by the EU and implemented by the Goethe Institute. So we also thank them for making this visit possible in April, and also consequently this talk to happen as well. So welcome, Jānis, welcome to the session today.
Hello, hi Leah, hi everyone. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure, our pleasure. It's been quite a while since we've been working on this project. Since maybe January, we've been discussing you coming here to Lisbon, and how can you get involved with a program and project, and what we can collaborate with. And so you came here in April, and one of the purposes of our project is to invite the creatives to like yourself to reimagine another relationship with Palácio Iglésias. For those who don't know the Palácio, it's in the corner next to the Fine Arts Academy, and so it also was known for or as the Palace of the Fine Arts. So that's why we also borrowed this or appropriated this title for the PdBA, so the Palace of the Fine Arts building, and it's very much in the city center of Lisbon. And so you visited here, you spent 14 days. What were your first impressions of this building, the Palacio and surrounding? Can you talk a bit more about your relationship with this particular building?
Yes, well, of course, the first impressions were not what I was expecting to see. Of course, I had checked the building and the environment and location on a map and Google 3D street views and 3D views, a little bit of archival images that Leah had prepared. So I was sort of familiar. I would recognize the building if I was walking by and saw it. But then again, somehow being there, actually walking up and down the topography of Lisbon and the hills and the slopes, it was like the impression was, I would say, very different from what I had imagined. That's just on an emotional level, on how you approach a building, and when you first see it, the impression is not what I was expecting exactly. What I was. I've been thinking about what's the difference and how was it different, and I've been thinking about it a lot. But honestly, I just can't put it to words. So it remains a bit romantic in my memories still. So that's good, I guess. Yes, but then in general, that's a very beautiful building, historical building, and despite having a bit worn down facades or some cracked windows and some graffitis here and there. I would say it's in a very good shape, at least from the outside, it looks like. Another observation or realization that I only had after visiting the site multiple times is how the two ends of the building facing two different streets, how there's no way you would guess that that's a single building, even though the color of the facade is the same and ornamentation is along the same lines. But still, it like the urban setting and how is it situated in the urban block. It's very kind of two-faced, two-sided object, which I found very interesting.
And we are talking about a building, for those who don't know it, that was constructed in 1859 and developed by the architect Giuseppe Sinati, which is Italian by origin, but then transitioned to Lisbon and actually also developed a series of other palacios and other projects related to theater, for example. So it was also commissioned by a particular family, which is the family Iglesias. That's what gave it its name. And so it has a very intricate story behind it, not only in terms of that particular period, but how it was constructed and where it was constructed, first of all, because, sorry, Jānis, just to contextualize those that are just kind of like getting to know the project, because I know you've heard the story too many times. But it was constructed on top of a terrain that was acquired by their uncle. And before that, supposedly it was actually the terrain that was in between the St. Francis Church, which doesn't exist anymore, and the Church of the St. Matris, the Matris Church, which is now at the Goethe Street nearby. And both were kind of destroyed almost entirely on the earthquake of 1755. So that kind of terrain became available. I don't know how. There's still a lot of gaps to uncover in terms of the history of this building and how it came to be just a lot to be kind of reconstructed. But we do know from some of the references, historical reference that we have, and also academic literature and research that have been made, that supposedly the architect was supposed to kind of bring in that facade from supposedly the St. Francis Church into their architectural plan, but then that kind of fell through for different reasons. But in the end, we see what we have now, that it's a new classical building that has several references, not only in terms of the Italian architect background that Giuseppe Sinati brought in, but also at the time the Lisbon's kind of love for the French also styles, and you have kind of a lot of things building into it, right? And also, of course, you must have kind of in your walk through Lisbon seen how much different styles we have within a very short distance. I don't know if that kind of impacted your impression as well of the Palacio, how you kind of what's your second impression, let's say, after you had some time to walk through the city and kind of see the rest of this rich architecture that we have here?
Well, my first and a half or near to second impression is how considerate it is towards the Pombalino district, which was the creation after the earthquake. So the buildings were designed in a specific way, structurally and also aesthetically. So the goal, and also a brief explanation, the goal was to have a kind of urban ensemble with coordinated facade styles and facade elements and coordinated structural details. And then this building, from what I understand and heard from talks to architects from Lisbon, is a bit newer version of the Pombalin district. But then again, it's you can definitely see how it relates and how, I would say, relatively minimalistic the facades are, how repetitive the window rhythm is, and that's definitely a gesture to make friends with the surrounding districts. So I would say the more I visited the building, the more I was convinced of the intention of the architect and maybe the rules by the city. But then, just a small side note, I was spending a lot of time at the building if we talk about impressions and research, and I think that was my way of sort of researching it by just being around it and by seeing how do people interact with it and how the building itself behaves in different times of the day and how it sits in the location, because the location of the building is very, very central, and it's almost basically it's neighboring the municipality square, and it sits on top of a beautiful hill overseeing the beach and the Pombalin district. And I would say the area is very scenic, and sometimes there's nice social life going on outside next to the Belas Artes, the academy. Sometimes people were sitting on the stairs, including myself. I was sitting on the entrance stairs of the building a lot and making some sketches and just observing everything. So I had plenty of opportunities to have the second impression. So it didn't come. It didn't come striking. So I was not struck by any kind of second impression or revelation. It was more like slowly developing idea of what the building could actually be.
And this kind of brings us to discussing a bit about your research process. So you were invited to kind of research the surroundings, the building, and trying to come up with ways of bridging this experience between the physical space of the physical building and how we kind of can replicate or translate it, or perhaps reimagine it. I like to pose it because then that opens up to different ways of actually reconstructing it as well into the digital. How was this process for you, and how did you reach what you're kind of developing now? That we're just going to say that we're not going to say much because we don't want to spoil the surprise, which is quite interesting. So we're going to leave it like that, and maybe we have perhaps a different talk, a second talk, where we can come and discuss a little bit more about that. But there's a project coming up from this visit. So tell us a bit about your then experience between this kind of bridging the physical to the digital object that you were researching.
Yeah, I think the bridge itself came to be very, very late in the process, as you know very well, I think. But that's something about myself, I guess, that I keep discovering and learning about myself, is that I feel the most comfortable in a certain degree of uncertainty or ambiguity. And then before coming to Lisbon, I was trying to think of a motive for my research, or I was trying to grasp to many of the things that building can offer and how to work with it, how to relate to Lisbon, and how to maybe relate to many of the city's social and economical issues that it has. But it was very hard, and it was still very hard even after I came back from Lisbon. So it took me, I guess, a few months to actually come up with an idea that I think is decent and that we're not going to talk about right now, maybe later. But then the process was, I would say, it was very entertaining and also liberating, in a sense that I had this pressure that I need to come up with this idea and my research needs to make sense. But then I was also not bound by certain trajectories or motives that I should research. And I would say I was very open, and without knowing what exactly I want to do, I think I managed to kind of soak in maybe more information that started dripping from me a bit later. And yeah, this is something I think also fun way to work, I would say.
And it's actually really really interesting that you came with the Culture Move Europe grant as well, because I think that's really kind of the purpose. And it's really nice to have this kind of grant available for this kind of project where you don't have yet something so delineated in mind, but you need some support to actually go to a different place and collect materials and visit and engage and connect to people and try to get to know this thing, to be able to actually develop some project further. You have an idea, you have a purpose, but then you need some support. And that's really important, I think, in terms of not only researching the arts, but in terms of actually production and afterwards being able to create an exhibition out of it and have a proper, outcome, because this kind of funding, they don't really require that you have an outcome in the sense that you're going to exhibit or you're going to present something and so on. But it really is to kind of explore, and you had this kind of opportunity, right?
Hmm. And then you asked about bridging the research and bridging the project, and maybe also bridging the digitalities and specialities of the site and the building. So as well as everything else related to the project, this was also like the bridge was built also quite late in the process, but then it was largely determined also by my technical, like by my hardware capacities, which are rather limited, I would say. And I think in a contemporary architectural discourse, this is a reality to be not to be ashamed of, but rather to be proud of, because more and more in the architectural information field, it is appreciated how these kind of restrictions end up actually being creative drivers. And I would say this is also my case, because initially, as I was so confused in all the social and political complexities of the site and the building, I was trying to maybe turn down from these issues and to work with purely architectural qualities and maybe just to create an aesthetic visual artwork related to the building, but completely disregarding all these complexities that the building kind of captivates. But then none of my ideas really worked, because I had so many problems delivering things and producing things due to lack of computer resource. So I had to come up with something, I would say, rather quirky and smart, which I would like to think I actually did. And the project at the moment is in the development stage, but we're sort of nearing completion, I would say, at least to some parts of things that I'm producing for the project. So the gap, I would explain it that the bridge was mostly physical, because since the work was determined by computer resources, which is a physical thing, so I think these bridges between digital and physical spatialities, they were in the end determined by what is physically available.
Yeah, because we're also talking about, we also think about when we talk about digital twins and these industries and businesses, large corporations that are trying to replicate maybe a factory setting or something that need to monitor, something that's more detailed or data infused and things like that. You require a lot of computer power. So, and even for architecture, like you were saying, there are a lot of things, just to render a simple room actually takes a lot of work, time, and computer power. So if you don't have that kind of available, there's also ways of actually kind of working around it and using different kinds of tools for that. So you have basic photography. You can kind of do some basic editing as well, digital editing through these photographies. You are also working. Let's kind of like say of what kind of tools that you were already used to also, in your practice in terms of architecture, to actually produce something very different from your own practice. And so there's a lot of things involved in kind of making these kind of replica. But in the end, what it depends on is some kind of a purpose, what kind of objectives that you have in terms of creating this replica. What is it for? What kind of uh, interaction are we looking for? What kind of mediation are we looking for to actually have that kind of project? So it can be something very simple when you have also a way of reaching that objective through other means, right? So I think for the PdBA project, for example, we also have artists that are not necessarily working with the visuality, right? So not videos or images or any sort of that. So Florian Winczek is working with sound. And there's a way also of creating spatiality, a sense of space through sound as well. We also did a workshop with 3D modeling with participants that had some or no actually background on recreating objects. So also creating digital twins in terms of small elements of the palace. So we created the ornaments of that building through 3D modeling, and with those models, we were able to kind of interact with it in different ways, kind of study it in different ways. And now our digital designer is also kind of trying to manipulate those models to create something more, let's say, movable, dynamic, and we're working through that. So you can actually um, go also through, smaller bits in terms of smaller scales, those ornaments, those really, really small elements to actually a larger scale. And I think, not to spoil, but I think you're kind of in between, right? So you're not recreating the whole building itself, but you're creating parts of that building. And that's where maybe you've also found your solution, right? So you're not like doing a complete replica from, from bottom to the top of the building, but you were cleverly selecting particular elements to work with your technical limitations, but also time. We have a short time to actually reproduce a certain building as well, right? But then you also, visit here. We went to a couple of archives where we were also able to view the architectural plans, interior, the exterior. And how do you feel that these elements, well, while you were here, the photographs that you took, the sketches that you made, you spent a lot of time, like you said, around the building, sitting on the stairs and kind of watching also the movement. How did that kind of influence making of a project, of a reproduction of a building, for example?
Well, it influenced in a way that I was trying. That the reason for me spending so much time on site was I was trying to find or to observe something that's valuable for me and that's something interesting for me to work with. But that's also, it has to be something meaningful. So that's why I spend so much time there. But then either because of maybe lack of my intellectual capacity or maybe because of some kind of mismatch between my ambition and what I actually managed to observe, I realized that this kind of approach that I had chosen doesn't work for me simply. So that's also, it's just a good lesson learned, I would say. And even though even if I don't directly use those sketches and observations that I had, I don't directly use them in my project. But I think there are so many layers of making of a project that I have no doubt that the time was like well spent and absolutely valuable for what I'm working for now.
And so we're talking about, for example, creating a sketch that actually is also a process of getting to know the building itself through, for example, drawing. You can actually, learn through the curves and getting to know like the details, and from that process, it's a way also of getting to know a physical building that you had no experience of before, right? And while you were here as well, we tried to visit, for example, Lago Residencias, which is now a partner. We've been collaborating with them as well, and which has a similar approach to kind of repurposing historical buildings. and in the city and through art and community engagement. And he also been working in Latvia, those terms as well, with historical pub ruins, and also thinking about the community around it, right? So can you talk a bit more about your own practice there, or architectural practice there in Latvia, and how you see comparatively, what's been doing here in Lisbon in terms of architectural heritage, or in terms of kind of preserving that, repurposing buildings with these examples, not only with the PdBA in terms of reproducing buildings with digital means, and like Residencia physically kind of repurposing through the use of an abandoned place, for example, right?
Mhm. Well, I would, at the moment, I would comment on what I do believe in, what I try to work with, and what I find my current mission is, I would say. And that's also related to my thesis, and that's a bit related to also what I found out in Lisbon and in Portugal in general. So I think what's interesting for me as an architect, as a professional, and a bit of a thinking person, is the balance between preservation of a historical heritage and between kind of making it functional and letting it live and move on. And so what I do know, what's a thing in Portugal, for example, is you have so many restrictions on how all the historical villages, like rural villages, should look. What can you do with a new building, for example? Or what can you do with an existing building when you refurbish it? And I think the drive of people to have their individual space, or the discrepancy between what's to be preserved and what people actually need or want to live in these any kind of existing buildings. I think it is well represented in Lisbon, for example, because many of the interiors, including the one I think of Palácio Iglésias, they are not necessarily matching the characteristics of the facade. And you can have insanely richly decorated interiors with like within a building which is rather modest and minimalistic and clean. So I think so the lesson learned is that sometimes you need to let go of certain qualities, possibly to give space for any kind of future use. To put it simply, there are so many buildings in Portugal, in Lisbon, in Riga. There are so many empty buildings that are waiting for its occupants. But then sometimes these buildings, they cannot move on with hosting people and users because the restrictions are so hard, and you need to invest a lot, and you need to invest expensive materials to kind of get the building going. And also the other thing is with the preservation, sometimes you need, like you are obliged to preserve certain moments or certain parts of the building or the building as a whole. But then you by doing this, it is likely that you cannot ensure that the building would be efficient and resource saving, and yeah. So I think in times that we live in, these things should be reconsidered, and maybe there are some things in the building, like either the building technology or some kind of aesthetical qualities of the building that can be preserved without actually replicating them exactly, or without being constrained to preserving the building exactly as it is, and to make it move on with life. So I think one of main objectives of my thesis work was to preserve through transformation. So it implies that the building has to be transformed in order to be even preserved. Otherwise, the empty building just keeps on decaying and decaying, and in the end, there's even nothing to preserve. But then if you allow some kind of deviations from the traditional preservation or conservation work, then you may have a working building which is preserved much faster and much more affordably. So, but then it's important to note that I'm also not against preservation, and I respect heritage a lot, and I think it is good to have a certain memory, either individual or collective memory of how the city or how the building is and was and what it used to mean for others. But then it's maybe the level of ridiculousness should be turned down a little bit, and we should maybe think more about the planet rather than those cultural monuments that we have.
That brings me to the next question, but before I ask, I just want to check in with everyone that's watching us live online. If they have any questions, do write questions or references or anything that comes to mind in terms of what we are discussing. So participate in the discussion through the chats. You can send and I'll check in a bit. And so I was going to ask you, that kind of brings in the importance of digital replicas, of digital twins, in terms of, kind of being able to create this kind of a preservation of a physical building like this. So can you talk about that? I mean, how do you view digital technologies, not only in terms of how it helps architectural practice nowadays, but when we think about these digital twins and how it can actually aid these sort of abandoned or almost, Latvian case when you were talking about the ruined pubs in the historical center, how it might, help in these cases?
Well, I am sure there are many ways that it can help, starting from just being a source of inspiration, what could be done with the building, like potential uses or potential qualities, or and then I think digital twin, like you were giving the explanation before, and I think there are two ways of thinking of digital twins. Like one way is the very pragmatic, precise, data consuming way of having a digital twin, which is the exact replica of the physical object. For example, this is often used in industry, and also I have the experience in working during my master thesis time in a company, design company that produces module houses, and then one of our tasks was to update constantly the digital twin of the building, including every screw, every detail. Everything has to be calculated, counted, and then through this digital twin, you know everything you need to know about the building, and you can learn about the building. So if someone else, for example, 10 years from now, opened the 3D model, they would see everything, how the building is being built, including instructions, what follows what, and how, like, what happens with the building. So I think that's the very pragmatic aspect, and I think that's the rather popular way of looking at digital twins. But I think what I'm doing with my project, and like there are many projects like this out there, digital twin is also grounds for speculation, I would say, and this is something that liberates from all sorts of obligations and responsibilities one would have to face if working with a real building. Basically, with the digital twin, I can do whatever I want with it. And the interesting question is who's responsible for it, or how far can you go, or what happens with the authorship, for example, of a digital twin, or what happens if the digital twin turns out to be harmful in some way, for example, or if it gives you the wrong lessons in life. These are also, of course, important questions. But then I think every human action, every human invention has their upsides and downsides. So I think at the moment it's probably, at least for me as a naive and optimistic person, I think it's more interesting and efficient to focus on the upsides, on the good parts of digital twins. And I think there's probably a lot to explore. I think even in architectural faculty where I did my master's, we were working a lot with digital twins, and sometimes it was a part of the task to do something with a digital twin or with a digital model of the building. And sometimes it went by unconsciously somehow, and then decisions you made or the tests you do with how the building would work, I think it's a really nice exercise and valuable experience to work with digital twins, especially in these days when augmented reality is possible or virtual reality is available, and just a matter of putting on your goggles and you can immerse yourself in a really precise or obscure digital twin. So. Yeah.
Wonderful. I'm super excited to experience your project that you're developing now for us. We hope that we can probably experience it by next year. So I think invite everyone that's watching, found this almost like a teaser, a little bit, to follow us, follow Jānis, and see how we develop this together, and we'll keep everyone in the loop and let you know when things come out. But I'm super excited to, for this project. I think it was going to be very, very nice. It's going very nicely in terms of, so far in terms of your work in progress. And I hope, people take this talk as an introduction to the topic, and then we can come back later on and join this conversation and discuss in more details and further. And if anyone wants to kind of reach out with any questions and about architecture and digital twins and the topics that we talked about today, do so through our channels. Or I don't know, Jānis, how can people get in touch with you and get to know your work?
Well, I think emails or Instagrams are the best possible way to reach me. So my name is Jānis Aufmanis, and that's also my Gmail, and that's also my Instagram. So it's very self-evident. However, I would like to get back to the project, like briefly, and also maybe mention that the fact that I started producing the digital twin almost. Like I started producing the digital twin for different reasons, but only the fact that it was starting to take shape, I got to look at the building from a different perspective. And that's a perspective that I would never be able to kind of analyze or conclude from walking around the building or looking at the maps or looking at archival materials. So all these things come together, but I think the culmination was the production of the digital twin itself. So
the hands-on part.
First of all, the hands-on part. Second of all, the kind of comprehensive view of the object that one gets. And then I was able to kind of get rid of neighboring buildings. I mean, I have them, but if you have a digital twin, you can just turn off the layer and you can have a completely new perspective on an object if you have these means to produce digital twins or to work with them. So I think that's very important. I never knew, today was the first time I heard that the digital twin is becoming almost like a buzzword.
Yeah, I hear it a lot, especially because once it reached, for example, you see grants and project calls from the EU and the European Union trying to understand better what are virtual worlds or what are digital twins, to be able to make better decisions in terms of granting or what kind of directions the EU should go in terms of these applications. Already says a lot, because they're like, it reached them. It's like, okay, so people are talking about this, people are using this, companies are investing in this. There's a lot of talk, but we also hear a lot about metaverse and kind of like photo reality and the AI combined with that. It kind of builds into that mega buzzword clusters that we have today in terms of creating digital spaces. So and I invite everyone again to keep in touch, because this is something that we can talk a lot about for a long time. And like I said, like there's different ways of perceiving what a digital space is, and what a digital twin can be, a replica can be, and how we can use it. And I invite people also to send us suggestions, because there are a lot of other projects that we don't know, especially independent projects that we don't know, that are working also towards kind of, like you said, using this kind of replica as a way of reimagining a space, what it could be, what it could have been, and be a bit free of these kind of limitations that we have when we stick towards, too much of what it is now and the reality of things and the object, the materiality of things and how it is now. So yeah, so we invite also people to reach out to us and send us examples that we would love to know as well. So that's it. Jānis, thank you very much for your contributions. Your talk was always a pleasure talking to you and discussing these super interesting topics. Do you have some last words that you would like to say?
Well, I look forward to wrap up my project, and I really look forward to actually, tackle the thing and to talk about my project when it's done. Because it feels like I have a lot of energy inside me that just needs to kind of burst out. And I think, having an online talk is a beautiful way to live.
I'm dying to say what it is, but I can't. So yeah. I'm excited as well for that. So thank you very much, Jānis. Thank you everyone for watching, and see you next time. Please follow for more.
See you soon. See you soon. Bye.
Ciao.